It's morning on Wall Street. In just a few seconds, the nation's capital markets will answer their wake-up call. Every trading day, billions of dollars in securities are bought and sold in the largest and most efficient capital market in the world. At the heart of every transaction is accurate, reliable information.
We are moving and living in very, very fast times, and the information flow is tremendous. The auditors provide, in many ways, the filter so that we're getting the best quality of numbers and the best possible representation of a company that we can have.
You're done on your Intuit at 3/4.
Markets are driven by information, and it's the role of the auditor that brings confidence that the information coming into the marketplace is reliable and is believable, and that is a very critical role in the capital market system.
Independence is the core of the profession, the very essence that gives an auditor's work its value. It is the space and freedom to think, to speak, to act on the truth. And truth is the lifeblood of investor confidence.
The value of auditor independence to public confidence reaches far beyond Wall Street. It touches the lives of people whose investments will fund their future.
The integrity of the auditor's work is between myself, my son, and our goals for our future.
Well, I am making you a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
When you're a single mom, everything you do is just you and him. You develop a lot more anxiety over the status of your investments and watching your investments because you rely on them a lot more than if you were a two-income family.
As soon as there is a question about the integrity of the financial reporting, the stocks get hit and get hit brutally. The professional investors come in at that point, and the little guy who's doing day trading is going to get clobbered.
Bob Cordy is the CFO of Avon Products, a public company required to issue audited annual financial statements to the Securities and Exchange Commission.
It sounds like perhaps motherhood and apple pie, but integrity has got to be at the base of financial reporting. There can't be any question to that. The numbers that we report really have to reflect the results of our business, and we rely on the independent accountants to ensure that that's exactly what we're doing.
I think of independence as being a little bit like air. It's very important, but we don't think about it much unless it's not there.
It's like good health. We expect it. And if we find out that it doesn't exist, we would be deeply concerned.
Top five.
3 bid 5,000, 5,005.
The recent bull market echoes an earlier period of skyrocketing stock prices. But during those roaring 20s, markets were largely unregulated, with catastrophic results. The stock market crash of 1929 may be remembered as the beginning of the Great Depression. But it was another, less famous episode that prompted the federal government to take a closer look at how businesses audited and reported their activity. It started with a Swedish industrialist named Ivar Kruger, known as the Match King. Kruger was instrumental in funding the reconstruction of Europe after World War I with money from his successful commodity business, which supplied wooden matches to the world.
He was adored worldwide as the savior of a lot of economies because what he did is he would give folks money in exchange for getting the franchise to be the exclusive supplier of matches.
But Kruger's empire was not what it seemed. Although Kruger & Toll was one of the very few companies solvent after the stock market crash, Kruger's reputation was built on a foundation of fraud.
He was borrowing money to pay dividends, he was borrowing money to pay interest, and he had a large, what we'd call today's Ponzi scheme going, borrowing from others to pay off others. It's a complete undermining of someone who had been looked as a pillar of the post-crash market. That was now gone.
Kruger took his own life in Paris in 1932. After his death, the details of Kruger's business practices came to light, shaking the confidence of the American investor.
Within a period of 6 months, the securities market began to unravel around his stocks, and that's what precipitated the Senate Banking Committee beginning to look at regulating the American stock exchanges.
Democracy succeeds.
Less than 100 days after his swearing in, President Franklin Roosevelt gave Congress the mandate to regulate the financial markets in order to restore public confidence. Hearings in April of 1933 set the Senate Banking Committee on one side, and on the other, the accounting profession, represented by Colonel Arthur Carter, senior partner of Haskins & Sells.
You could sense when you read the testimony, even 60 years later, that there was a tension in the air. Senator Barkley of Kentucky was the sort of the lead interrogator, you might say. Arthur Carter was a West Point graduate, and he was the representative of the accounting profession at the 33 hearings. He's a very forthright individual, and he entered into this exchange of questions and answers during the hearing.
Do you not think it's more in the interest of the public that is to buy these securities, if there is to be any checkup or any guarantee as to the correctness, that it be done by some government agency rather than by some private association of accountants?
I think it's an impractical thing for the government agency to do it effectively.
Why?
Because it involves such a large force. It involves the question of time. I think the public accountant is better equipped to do that than the average government agency would be able to do that.
Is there any relationship between your organization with 2,000 members and the organization of the controllers represented here yesterday with 2,000 members?
None at all. We audit the controllers.
You audit the controllers?
Yes, the public accountant audits the controller's account.
Well, who audits you?
Our conscience.
It's a very interesting, a very important response, suggesting that individual responsibility of the auditor was really the ultimate ground upon which we were going to be building this foundation for auditor independence and for effective action of auditors.
I think if Colonel Carter were here today, he would still find that his notion or his ideal of the auditing profession serving as the conscience in protecting the user's interests is more important today than it ever has been.
Nearly 70 years later, independence is still an issue that sparks discussion and debate. Recent high-profile cases of audit failure have raised the question, where were the auditors?
As the firms expand their product lines, consulting and other services may shorten the distance between the auditor and management. Independence, if not in fact, and certainly in appearance, becomes a more elusive proposition.
The Independent Standards Board was created because independence rules had grown outdated, and they needed a fresh, hard look by people who were willing to simplify them and to make sure that they could really be objective.
You know, life is full of conflicts. Every relationship creates conflicts. And part of what we're dealing with the independence issue is how do you manage conflicts of interest?
Well, I believe the complexity of the auditing and accounting rules today are no defense for the auditor in terms of not performing his or her responsibility in the public interest.
And to stand up and say, no, this is not right, against the client's wishes, maybe loss of the client, potential professional development problems, to step up and say, no, this is not the way we want to deal with this, and to say no takes a lot of courage.
The accounting profession is meeting the challenge of the changing business environment and working to develop a conceptual framework for independence. Still, the ultimate assurance of auditor independence will always rest with the individual practitioner.
I think a better way of thinking about it is with using the word perception. It's like the difference between telling the truth and being believed. I can sit here today and tell you the truth, but what's important, and that's important, But what is also important is whether you believe me or not. And both of those elements are really critical to investor confidence.
If you've compromised your accounting firm to the point where the senior person doesn't dare criticize the company or cause a problem for the company, that doesn't do me any good.
I have no other source to understand this company, to rely on this company that I'm evaluating, than the audited financial statements. And when something may come up that calls into question that credibility and that independence, it rocks my world.
You know, you only go around once. At the end of the day, really all you have is your integrity. An auditor who compromises his integrity or her integrity really has nothing.
With more than half of all Americans owning stocks, 401k plans, or mutual funds, investors trust that integrity. In fact, they are counting on it.
We're talking about individuals. We're talking about those who are saving for retirement. We're talking about heads of households. We're talking about parents who are investing for the future. And it's their protection, the protection of those investors that is critical to the system.
Investing for me is what I use for future growth within our own family. As an investor, you're going to feel like you want the truth. To me, an auditor is a third party. They're out of the forest. They are looking. They're the observers. It's their eyes and ears that are monitoring that company. You want to feel that they're doing that on your behalf.
People make decisions about committing enormous sums of money based in part on the judgments that you as auditors render.
It sometimes doesn't have the image that either law or medicine has, but it's a very essential profession, and it's really the backbone of commerce around the world.
The independent audit is not a means to anything else, but rather a critically important end in itself. We're going to build on our past by being certain that independent oversight is so fundamentally a part of the industry's culture that it removes any uncertainty or any doubt.
So the professional today, more than ever, has to be cognizant of the intricacies of the existing independent structure, learn that independent structure, and come into compliance with it.
When you think about the common sources of error in making independent judgments, I think you find a central theme to most of those errors in judgment. And that theme to me is what I would call a distraction from role. And what I mean by distraction from role is that when you become an independent auditor, you take on certain responsibilities to perform that function. And anything that distracts you from that function, whether it be a relationship or whether it be other circumstances, can lead to a lapse in judgment in exercising in the exercise of independence.
There could be a number of independence judgment problems, and one of those begins with problem recognition. That is, just recognizing this is an independence issue that we're dealing with. In the ethical reasoning literature, this is called moral or ethical sensitivity. So it's important, for example, if the client asks us to, an audit firm, to outsource internal audit, to think about, well, you know, that could, or recognize that could result in some independence issues that we need to guard against and we need to be careful about.
The audit process and financial reporting is a cascade of issues and problems that need to be dealt with professional judgment. And the auditor can bring that professional judgment to not only the audit process, but the application of GAAP. And while he or she may be asked by the client to sign off on what appears to be an appropriate GAAP answer, that the auditor in his or her heart knows is not the right answer under the circumstances, that creates the real tension, the real moment of truth in terms of auditor independence. Identifying that issue, dealing with it with conviction and fortitude, and using the audit committee where appropriate to come to the right answer, not from management's point of view, but from the investing public's point of view. An initial issue, such as a waived adjustment or an immaterial transaction that's in violation of GAAP, is waived by the auditor, and his or her belief that it doesn't materially distort the financial statements. That's where they fall into the trap, and as the quarters pass by and the year evolves, the next year they're faced with a material effect of that transaction, and they're put in a box. They've already dealt with it with management. Management can create tremendous pressure on the auditor. We did it that way last year, and you said yes. Now the auditor's in a dilemma, and it becomes more difficult to stand up to the client and correct the situation, and they're seduced into the first stage of inappropriate financial reporting.
Gray blindness gets at the problem of looking at the rules in black and white and thinking that they are that way, when in fact the professional rules of conduct relate to a spirit, the notion of independence in fact and in appearance. So auditors need to recognize that in fact the rules involve and the application of the rules involve a great deal of professional judgment. And so it comes back, I think, to trying to think about these not as specific detailed rules that I need to comply with, but to recognize them as providing the kind of the framework or the spirit behind what we're trying to ultimately accomplish, which is independence in fact and independence in appearance.
Overconfidence by the auditor is a common problem. Now you can suggest, and it may well be rooted in independence, but professionals have tremendous confidence in their own judgment. And the firms, all the firms have set up the safety net with the concurring partner and the consulting routine within the firm. A professional that doesn't avail themselves of that support system in the firm is not doing themselves justice, and they're not doing their client justice. Because once again, as we look at real audit failures, we find often that they were complex issues that the auditor believed that they had the confidence and the capability to deal with, but at the end of the day, had they consulted and had a fresh look at the transaction from somebody that was completely objective and not involved in the client relationship process, there would have been a different answer.
Confirmation bias is a natural tendency, and this is a situation where you have a position, for example, the client may advance something that, a way that they'd like to report a certain financial transaction and make them look favorably. And with that position, you have to guard against the danger of looking for professional standards that support the client's position and talking to, in consultation, trying to support that position.
The professional casts the problems and the attributes of the problem in a way that they don't really present the economic consequences of the transaction or event with the consultant. So they frame the question to the consultant in a way that they're going to get the answer that they're looking for and the client is looking for. They've got to be completely objective and open and deal with all the facts and the economic circumstances of the client in framing the question to the consultant to get the appropriate and correct answer.
There's a class of common errors that we call inappropriate submission. And this can be as simple as a junior accountant yielding to the judgment of a senior accountant when the junior accountant really doesn't believe that that's the appropriate answer, but yielding on the basis of authority. It could happen at any level within the engagement team or within the firm.
And auditors do face a great deal of pressure, particularly in the current market where companies are trying to hit certain earnings targets and expectations. So the auditor in that situation has to kind of go back, and in the ethical reasoning literature, the term we use for this kind of question is moral courage. That is, even if you know there's a problem there and you know that this isn't quite right, you need to have the courage to be able to say no and to say this is not something that can go forward.
Everyone has to have the ability and the strength to pursue their convictions. That's absolutely essential to the success of an independent auditor.
The auditor needs not only conviction, not only a neutral mental attitude and objectivity, but they have to have the internal fortitude and strength to say no.
Hi, Preston.
Gail, thanks for coming in. How was Boston?
Boston was good.
Quite a dynamic team that Nathan's put together up there.
You're right about that. It's a real joy working with a top-notch client who's having a great year. Quite a contrast to the Beekman engagement.
That's what I wanted to see you about. Eric Manning phoned while you were gone.
It doesn't surprise me. I wanted to brief you before going there this afternoon.
Actually, I took the liberty of asking Timothy to fill me in.
Timothy? Well, did he explain to you the battles that we've been having over inventory and receivables allowances?
Laid them all out clearly. Then I paid a visit to Beekman. Spent an afternoon with Eric Manning, and we worked through the issues.
Oh?
You'll be happy to know that we ironed the whole thing out.
Really?
Came to a reasonable compromise. They got the numbers to their annual report printer, and everything's put to bed. The job just requires your signature.
Well, when you say reasonable compromise, how did their bottom line turn out as a result of this compromise?
Small profit, but a lot less than their board was expecting. I thought you'd be pleased.
Yes, well, I guess I just need to take a look at what the final resolution turned out to be.
Of course. I've had the files waiting in here for your return. The final financials are here, client data that Timothy copied, and the engagement control form, which just needs your signature.
Well, once I finish with writing the prelims on the Boston engagement, I will go over this.
Please do. I've already signed the audit report. Jordan Smith's the concurring partner on this. Naturally, he won't let us release our opinion until all the signatures are in place.
And for the sake of argument, suppose I have a problem with something in here.
Gail, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. Look, I know this was a tough engagement. You called their financial people unresponsive, as I recall. Maybe you and the CFO just locked horns on some judgment calls. You couldn't see the forest for the trees. It happens.
Well, in case I don't get through all of this today, I'll take it home tonight. You around in the morning in case I have any questions?
Be in all day.
Now that I've seen exactly what marketing expenses they capitalize in that bizarre asset account, I can finally give you the details for a reversing adjustment.
Hallelujah. Timothy, where do you stand with the depreciation test?
Well, they made a very odd end-of-year adjustment that reduced their depreciation expense by half. They tell me it's just a math error.
You guys really know how to tie up a conference room. Leland says you're raking his staff over the coals. It's just an audit. Let's not turn it into an MBA thesis. I've got a board waiting for an annual report.
Mr. Manning, we are not raking anybody. Well, what I was hoping to say is you get me the item-by-item inventory turnover statistics and the after-the-year-end cash receipts detail like we've been asking for, and we'll be ready for a real discussion.
Miss Orton, could I see you in my office, please?
I'll be right there.
Miss Orton? Glad I'm not in charge here.
Your day will come, Timothy.
I take it the old man's expressed my displeasure with the pace of your audit.
I'm aware that he'd like the annual report out just as soon as possible.
Frankly, Miss Orton, we expected this audit to be finished 2 weeks ago.
As I did, Mr. Wilson, but we have been asking for subsequent cash receipts data and inventory turnover statistics. Now, without that data, I am in no position to accept your allowance numbers for obsolete inventory and bad debts. Now, as we both know, those are the key judgments in this audit, and lacking proof to the contrary, I have to believe that both allowances should be doubled.
Oh, come on. We're dealing in a gray area on both issues. Your young people may be very smart, but they do not know our business, Miss Orton.
I'm not trying to tell you how to manage your business.
Let me just get down to brass tacks. Last year was a very tough year. Between the mega stores and the flood of dot-coms, we traditional wholesalers have seen our margins squeezed like Florida oranges. Your pinstripe team comes in here and finds some honest mistakes in our numbers, and I can live with that. But when it comes to the valuation of our inventory and the collectability of our customers' accounts, our 18 years of experience is worth more than your pop-in perspective.
I recognize that there's room for interpretation, but without substantive data, I can't just act on your opinion.
If I accept your pessimistic views of our receivables and inventory and have to double our allowance, we will end up in the red. And believe me, Miss Orton, this will not sit well with the man in the corner office.
Mr. Wilson, we are not going to solve this in the next 5 minutes. Now, from what my team tells me, they're very close to wrapping up loose ends on all the routine stuff, and as you know, I have to be in Boston next week.
Well, you know, this is exactly why I wanted to see this audit finished this week. You can't change your plans.
Not at this date.
Now, Timothy will be in charge while I'm gone, and I'm instructing him to wrap everything else up by midweek, and that will give your staff ample opportunity to give us the data that we've been asking for, and then we can reach closure.
I'll brief the old man, but he's not going to like it.
Preston Treadway.
Hello, Preston.
Eric, good to hear